In the heart of the Himalayas, where the air is thin and hope seems even thinner, Beck Weathers found himself teetering on the edge of despair. Stranded in the infamous death zone of Mount Everest, he faced a chilling reality. He had been left for dead. As the biting cold seeped into his bones, every passing hour felt like an eternity. Picture this: a relentless storm howling around him, snow blinding his vision, and a profound silence that echoed his isolation. For 18 grueling hours, Beck battled not just the elements, but his own mind, grappling with fear and the haunting thought that no one was coming. His body, weakened by altitude sickness and frostbite, felt like it was betraying him. Each moment stretched as he fought to stay awake, to stay alive. The bitter cold gnawed at him, while the mountain loomed as an indifferent giant. As Beck lay there, memories flooded his mind. Laughter, warmth, the faces of loved ones urging him to hold on. But would those memories be enough to pull him from the brink? The struggle for survival became a testament to the indomitable human spirit, pushing him to defy the odds. What would you do in his place? The beginning of the ascent, Beck Weathers stood at the base of Mount Everest, a mix of excitement and trepidation swirling within him. The air was crisp, the sun shone brightly, and the snow-dusted peaks loomed majestically against the azure sky. Yet, beneath this breathtaking beauty, there was an underlying tension. Beck had trained rigorously for this moment, but as he looked up at the daunting mountain, a flicker of doubt crept into his mind. Would he be able to conquer this giant? Would his body hold up against the unforgiving conditions that lay ahead? The weather was cooperative at that moment, a rare gift in the volatile climate of the Himalayas. However, Beck knew that conditions could change in an instant. One moment the sun was shining, and the next a blizzard could roll in, transforming the landscape into a treacherous whiteout. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves, and focused on the task at hand. This was not just another climb. It was Everest, the ultimate test of human endurance and willpower. As the group began their ascent, Beck felt a rush of adrenaline. Each step was a step into the unknown, and he was both exhilarated and terrified. The camaraderie among the climbers buoyed his spirits, but he also felt the weight of the challenge ahead. With each passing moment, the mountain loomed larger in his mind. The thrill of the climb was palpable, but so were the whispers of danger that echoed through his thoughts. Despite the excitement, Beck was acutely aware of the mental and physical strain that would accompany this journey. He had read the stories, heard the warnings, and witnessed the toll that Everest had taken on others. As the group pressed forward, he tried to shake off the nagging feeling that something could go wrong. After all, he had come so far, and turning back was not an option he wanted to consider. However, as they climbed higher, Beck's emotions began to shift. The initial thrill gave way to a sense of foreboding. The altitude was increasing, and he could feel the air thinning. His heart raced, not just from exertion, but from a primal instinct urging him to tread carefully. The mountain was beautiful, but it was also a relentless beast that demanded respect. With that thought lingering in his mind, Beck continued his ascent, determined to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The struggle for survival as the climb progressed, Beck started noticing the first signs of difficulty. What began as a slight fatigue morphed into a heavy weight pressing down on his chest. He brushed it off at first, attributing it to the sheer physical exertion of the climb. But as the hours dragged on, the exhaustion became undeniable. Each step felt heavier than the last, and he could sense his body protesting against the relentless demands of the mountain. Beck's mind raced as he attempted to push through the fatigue. He could see his fellow climbers moving steadily ahead, and he was determined to keep pace. But then, a wave of nausea hit him, and he stumbled slightly. It was a troubling sign, one that he tried to ignore. After all, he had come this far. Surely he could muster the strength to continue. Yet, as the altitude increased, so did the toll on his body. The struggle for survival wasn't just physical. It was an emotional battle, too. Doubts began to creep in, whispering that he was not cut out for this adventure. Beck had always prided himself on his resilience, but now he felt vulnerable, exposed to the elements and his own limitations. The mountain was unforgiving, and with each passing moment, he could feel the weight of his ambition becoming a burden. As he ascended, the signs of altitude sickness became more pronounced. His head throbbed, and he felt disoriented, as if the mountain itself was playing tricks on his mind. Every breath was a labor, and the beauty that had once inspired him now seemed to mock his struggle. Beck forced himself to focus on the present, step by step, breath by breath, despite the growing fatigue that threatened to overwhelm him. In those moments, the concept of survival took on a new meaning. It was no longer just about reaching the summit. It was about making it through each grueling moment. The mountain was a formidable opponent, and Beck realized that the fight for survival was only just beginning. The determination that had driven him to embark on his journey was now his only lifeline. The fall and separation from the group in a heartbeat, everything changed. One misstep, one moment of distraction, and Beck found himself tumbling down the icy slope. Time slowed as he fell, and chaos reigned. The wind whipped around him, and the sheer drop below seemed to stretch into infinity. His heart raced with panic as he fought to regain control. But the mountain had other plans. When he finally came to a stop, disoriented and shaken, Beck realized with horror that he was alone. The sounds of his fellow climbers had faded into the distance, their voices swallowed by the vastness of the mountain. He lay there, stunned, trying to process what had just happened. Panic surged within him as he understood the gravity of his situation. He was separated from the group, and the cold reality of his isolation began to sink in. The conditions around him were harsh and unforgiving. The biting wind cut through his gear, and the altitude pressed down on him like a vice. Beck attempted to call out, but his voice was lost in the howling wind. He was alone, and the thought sent chills down his spine. The mountain was beautiful, but it was also a cruel mistress, capable of stripping away everything he held dear in an instant. In that moment of separation, a wave of fear washed over him. He knew that the others would not realize he was missing until it was too late. The thought of being left behind in such a desolate place was suffocating. Beck's mind raced as he tried to assess the situation. He had to act quickly, but the cold and exhaustion weighed heavily on him. As he struggled to sit up, the realization hit him. He had to find a way to reconnect with his group. But the mountain was vast, and he had no idea where they had gone. Desperation clawed at him, and he forced himself to focus on the immediate goal, survival. With a deep breath, he began to plan his next move, knowing that every second counted. The experience of extreme altitude once Beck managed to collect himself, he faced a new kind of battle. The relentless effects of extreme altitude. At over 8,000 meters, he had entered the infamous death zone, where the air was thin and every breath felt like a monumental effort. The world around him seemed to distort, colors fading into a surreal haze. Beck could feel his body protesting, but he pushed through the discomfort, determined not to succumb to the mountain's grasp. The physical sensations were overwhelming. He felt lightheaded, and his heart raced uncontrollably. It was as though he were swimming through molasses. Every movement required an immense amount of energy. Beck fought against the encroaching fog in his mind, knowing that clarity was essential for survival. He had to stay focused, to remain vigilant. But the altitude was relentless, and he could feel himself slipping away. In addition to the physical toll, the psychological effects were equally daunting. Doubts and fears swirled in his mind, each one more insidious than the last. The isolation weighed heavily on him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched by the mountain itself, a silent observer waiting to make its move. The mental struggle was as exhausting as the physical one, and he could feel his resolve wavering. Beck found himself reflecting on the climb, the dreams that had led him to this point. He thought about the exhilaration he had felt at the beginning, the camaraderie of the group, and the thrill of adventure. But now, all that remained was the stark reality of survival, stripped of its romanticism. The mountain was no longer a challenge. It was a perilous adversary, and he was fighting for every breath. As he sat there, grappling with the extreme conditions, Beck understood that he was teetering on the edge of a precipice, both literally and metaphorically. The The mountain had a way of revealing one's true self, and in that moment, all he could do was confront the raw vulnerability of being human. He was a mere speck against the grandeur of Everest, and yet he clung to the hope that he could find his way back. The solitude and despair with each passing moment. The reality of Beck's solitude sank deeper into his bones. The silence was deafening, broken only by the howling wind that whipped around him. He felt an overwhelming sense of despair, a crushing weight that seemed to eclipse any glimmer of hope. The mountain, with its towering peaks and icy trails, had become both a sanctuary and a prison, and he was trapped in its merciless grasp. As he sat in the cold, Beck's mind began to wander. He thought about his life, his family, and the moments that had brought him to this point. The memories played like a slideshow in his mind, each one a reminder of what was at stake. The thought of never seeing his loved ones again filled him with a profound sadness, a sense of loss that transcended the physical struggle for survival. In those lonely hours, Beck grappled with the reality of being left behind. He had always been a fighter, but now he felt defeated. The mountain had stripped away the bravado, leaving him raw and exposed. He was acutely aware of the fragility of life, and the realization that he could be just another name in the attempts to move Beck. Weathers was in a dire situation, stranded at a high altitude where the air was thin, and every breath felt like a battle. With his limbs feeling heavier than lead, he made several attempts to move, driven by the primal instinct of survival. Each effort to rise from the snow felt like lifting a mountain. The biting cold and the suffocating lack of oxygen made it seem futile. He struggled against the numbing cold that had seeped into his bones, but with every attempt, he was reminded of how weakened he had become. It was a relentless cycle of hope and despair, forcing him to confront his limitations in a place where nature seemed to conspire against him. His mind raced through desperate thoughts as he attempted to push himself forward, inching through the unforgiving snow. The wind howled like a wild beast, mocking his efforts, while the horizon blurred into an indistinct haze. Each time he tried to stand, he found himself collapsing back into the snow, exhaustion wrapping around him like a heavy blanket. Yet, amidst the despair, a flicker of determination sparked within him, urging him to keep trying, to not give in to the cold and the isolation. He recalled the faces of his family, their smiles lighting up his darkest moments, propelling him to fight against the overwhelming urge to succumb to the elements. In his struggle to move, Beck became acutely aware of the disorientation that surrounded him. It was as if the mountain had a personality of its own, cruel and indifferent, taunting him with each gust of wind that swept across the ridge. He tried to focus on a direction, but the white expanse around him was disorienting, with no landmarks to guide him. With every effort, he felt himself slipping further away from clarity, battling not just the physical challenges but also the mental ones. The cold seeped into his consciousness, making it difficult to think straight, each thought clouded by the harsh environment. Despite the overwhelming odds, Beck's would have survived pushed him to keep moving, even if it was just a few inches at a time. He thought of the rescue team, of the possibility that someone might be out there looking for him. This thought provided a sliver of hope, a reason to keep going even when his body screamed to stop. With each small movement, he was reminded of his own resilience, a testament to the human spirit when faced with insurmountable challenges. Yet, the reality of the situation loomed large, and he couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away from him. As he continued his futile attempts to find help, Beck felt the world around him grow increasingly surreal. The cold was becoming a companion, one that whispered doubts into his ear and urged him to surrender. But even in the face of such despair, he held on to the belief that he could find a way out of this nightmare. The struggle to move became a defining moment for Beck, a testament to his determination to fight against the odds, even when every fiber of his being told him to give in. The extreme cold was not just a physical sensation for Beck. It was an all-consuming force that infiltrated his very being. As he lay there, each breath felt like inhaling shards of ice, chilling him from the inside out. It gnawed at his fingers and toes, threatening to steal away the last remnants of warmth he had left. He could feel the frostbite creeping in, a cruel reminder of how quickly the body could succumb to the unforgiving elements. It was a constant battle, one that he felt he was losing with each passing minute. With the temperature plummeting, Beck's body began to react in ways he had never imagined. His muscles tightened, movements became sluggish, and his mind felt foggy as if wrapped in a thick blanket of confusion. The cold was relentless, draining his energy and willpower, making it increasingly difficult to think clearly. Every instinct screamed for him to find shelter, to escape the biting wind that howled around him, threatening to pull him deeper into despair. Yet, there was a part of him that refused to give up, that clung to the hope that help would come, that he could still turn the situation around. In those long hours of waiting, Beck's mind oscillated between fiery determination and chilling resignation. He experienced moments where he felt the cold was an entity of its own, a malevolent force intent on claiming him. It numbed his senses, dulled his thoughts, and made every second feel like an eternity. Yet, in the midst of this torment, he also found a strange clarity, a realization that he was still alive, still breathing, and that as long as he had breath, he had a chance. As the hours dragged on, Beck became acutely aware of the toll the cold was taking on both his body and mind. He felt his skin growing cold and unresponsive, and the realization struck him like a hammer. He was running out of time. In those moments of stark awareness, he understood that survival was not just about physical endurance. It was also about mental fortitude. He needed to find a way to combat the cold that sought to take him, to hold on to the flickering flame of hope within him. Eventually, the cold became a constant reminder of his vulnerability, a cruel adversary in his fight for survival. Yet, even as it threatened to consume him, Beck discovered an inner strength he didn't know he possessed. He began to strategize in the face of the chilling reality, thinking about how he could conserve heat, how he could shield himself from the relentless wind. In those moments, he transformed from a victim of the elements to a warrior determined to reclaim his life from the clutches of the cold. Hallucinations and disorientation, the altitude and the extreme cold began to play tricks on Beck's mind, blurring the lines between reality and his imagination. As the hours passed, he found himself caught in a surreal haze, where the boundaries of his thoughts started to dissolve. Visions danced before his eyes. Flickers of memories intermingled with the harsh landscape around him. It was as if his mind was trying to escape the stark reality of his predicament, creating a fantasy world to shield him from the cold harshness of the mountain. At times, he thought he saw figures moving in the distance, shadows that seemed to beckon him closer. In his disoriented state, he would reach out, only to find nothing but the cold snow beneath his fingers. The hallucinations became more vivid, often taking the form of loved ones, their faces etched with concern, urging him to fight, to hold on. It was a bittersweet comfort amidst the chaos, a reminder of what awaited him if he could just survive a little longer. Yet, every time he tried to grasp those visions, they slipped away like grains of sand through his fingers. The disorientation he experienced was not just visual. It trickled into his thoughts, making it difficult for him to form coherent plans. As he struggled to maintain focus, fragments of his past blended with the present, creating a tapestry of confusion. He would find himself lost in memories of family gatherings, laughter, and warmth, only to be jolted back to the harsh reality of the biting cold and the desolation surrounding him. It was a disconcerting cycle that left him feeling even more isolated. Despite the unsettling nature of these hallucinations, they offered Beck a strange sense of solace. In those moments, he felt a connection to the world beyond the mountain, a reminder that he was not truly alone. It was as if his mind was crafting a lifeline, a way to keep his spirit alive amidst the overwhelming despair. Each fleeting vision gave him a momentary escape from his suffering, even if it was just an illusion. He found himself clinging to these moments of distraction as a way to cope with the reality he faced. However, with each passing hour, the line between reality and hallucination began to blur further. Beck would sometimes forget where he was, lost in a fog of confusion, struggling to remember the very reason he was there. In those moments of disorientation, he fought to retain his sense of self, to hold on to the flickers of clarity that emerged amidst the chaos. He knew he had to keep his mind sharp, to resist the pull of the hallucinations, as they could easily lead him down a path of surrender. It was a constant battle, one that required every ounce of his strength and determination. Moments of clarity amidst the chaos and confusion. Beck Weathers experienced fleeting moments of clarity that cut through the fog of despair. These moments were like bright stars in an otherwise dark sky, illuminating his thoughts and providing a renewed sense of purpose. As he lay in the snow, battling the cold and the hallucinations, he found himself reflecting on his life, his choices, and the sheer will to survive that had brought him to this point. It was during these moments of clarity that he understood the fight was not just for survival, but also for the chance to reclaim the life he had left behind. In the stillness of the harsh environment, Beck realized that he had the power to shape his own narrative. He could either succumb to the despair that threatened to engulf him or rise above it. It was a profound revelation, one that sparked a fire within him. He began to focus on what he could control, the strength of his will, the determination to keep moving, and the hope that help could be on the way. These moments became anchors for him, reminders of his humanity and the connections that awaited him beyond the mountain. During one of these moments of clarity, Beck found himself thinking about his family, his wife, his children, their laughter, and the warmth of their love. The thought of seeing them again became a powerful motivator, a beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness. It was as if their presence surrounded him, urging him to keep fighting, to push through interactions with other climbers as Beck Weathers lay on the icy slope of Everest. The thin air around him felt charged with a strange mix of desperation and fleeting hope. The brutal reality of his situation was stark, yet in the moments when other climbers passed by, he experienced a jolt of connection that pierced through the fog of despair. These brief encounters, though often no more than a glance or a shared nod, shifted something in him. They reminded him that he was not entirely alone in this unforgiving environment. Each climber, with their own story and struggles, seemed to carry a piece of humanity that flickered like a beacon amidst the overwhelming silence of the mountain. One climber, a young woman with a determined look in her eyes, stopped for just a moment. Beck could see the resolve in her face, but also the exhaustion. They exchanged a few words. Nothing profound, just the acknowledgement of shared struggle. Yet, in that instant, Beck felt a surge of camaraderie. It was a reminder that every individual on the mountain was battling their own demons, and that in some way, they were all part of the same fight against nature. This fleeting interaction sparked a flicker of motivation in him, urging him to keep pushing forward, even when every fiber of his being screamed for rest. But not all encounters were uplifting. Some climbers rushed past, their faces set in grim determination, oblivious to Beck's plight. Their indifference stung. It was as if they were already lost in their own worlds, consumed by their ascent, leaving Beck to grapple with his fate alone. The contrast between the warmth of a shared glance and the coldness of hurried footsteps was jarring. With each climber who passed without acknowledgement, Beck felt a deeper weight of isolation pressing down on him, as if the mountain itself was conspiring to erase his presence from its vastness. In the rare moments when climbers did stop to check on him, Beck felt a rush of gratitude. These encounters were brief but impactful. They often involved hurried exchanges of encouragement and concern, and for a moment he felt seen. However, the nature of high-altitude climbing meant that time was a luxury no one could afford. As quickly as they appeared, they would disappear into the swirling snow and wind, leaving Beck with the stark reality of his situation once more. Each interaction became a reminder of the fragility of life and the thin veil that separated him from those who were still moving toward their goals. Ultimately, these interactions with other climbers served to highlight the duality of his experience. On one hand, there was a shared humanity that briefly connected them all. On the other, an overwhelming sense of isolation that came from the brutal nature of their environment. As Beck lay there, he realized that the mountain was not just a physical challenge, but a psychological one as well. The fleeting moments of connection were a lifeline, grounding him in the reality of his existence even as the cold clutched at his body and spirit. Thoughts on life and death as Beck Weathers grappled with the harsh reality of his predicament. He found himself drifting into profound reflections on life and death. It was as if the mountain had stripped away all the distractions of modern life, leaving only the raw essence of existence. Questions that had once seemed trivial now loomed large in his mind. What did it mean to truly live? What legacy would he leave behind if he were to succumb to the mountain? Each thought was like a snowflake, unique and fleeting, yet collectively heavy with significance. He thought about his family, his wife and children, and how their lives would continue without him. The realization that he might never see their faces again pierced through the veil of despair. Memories flooded back. Laughter around the dinner table, the warmth of hugs, and the simple joys of everyday life. These cherished moments became a lifeline, a reminder of what was worth fighting for. In the face of death, love emerged as a powerful force, propelling him to cling to life even when every instinct was telling him to surrender. Yet, intertwined with these thoughts was a palpable fear of the unknown. The concept of death, once an abstract idea, now felt immediate and urgent. Beck considered the possibility of slipping into oblivion, of becoming just another statistic in the long history of Everest's tragic tales. Would he fade away unnoticed, or would there be a moment of clarity before the end? This contemplation of mortality brought with it an unsettling mixture of acceptance and resistance. He didn't want to die. He wanted to fight against the odds, to defy the very fate that seemed to beckon him. In those moments of introspection, Beck also pondered the nature of courage. What did it mean to be brave? Was it the absence of fear, or was it the ability to act in spite of it? As he lay there, vulnerable and exposed, he realized that true bravery lay in the heart's refusal to give up. He felt a flicker of determination spark within him, igniting a desire to push through the pain and uncertainty. This realization became a mantra, urging him to hold on, to survive, not just for himself but for the love he held for his family. Ultimately, these deep reflections on life and death transformed Beck's perspective. Each thought became a thread in the tapestry of his existence, weaving together the complexities of love, fear, and the indomitable will to survive. As he lay in the freezing cold, confronted by the specter of mortality, he found a renewed sense of purpose. He would not let the mountain claim him without a fight, and in that resolve, he discovered a piece of himself that he never knew existed. The arrival of rescue, the moment of rescue, was a blur of sensations for Beck Weathers, an experience that felt both surreal and deeply grounding. As he lay on the unforgiving slope, clinging to consciousness, he suddenly became aware of movement in the distance. The shapes of figures began to materialize through the swirling snow and gusting winds. They were climbers, but not just any climbers. These were members of a rescue team, braving the very conditions that had nearly claimed his life. The sight of them sparked a flicker of hope deep within him, igniting a desperate urge to stay awake, to fight for his life just a little longer. As they drew closer, Beck felt a rush of emotions. Relief washed over him like a warm blanket, yet it was quickly followed by a wave of exhaustion. The struggle to remain conscious became a battle of its own. He was aware of their voices, muffled yet filled with urgency, as they called to him, encouraging him to hold on. Each word felt like a lifeline, pulling him back from the brink of unconsciousness. Despite the numbing cold and the relentless fatigue, he fought against the pull of darkness, determined to respond, to let them know that he was still there, still fighting. When the rescuers reached him, their faces were a mix of concern and determination. They worked quickly, assessing his condition and providing whatever assistance they could muster in such harsh conditions. Beck could feel their hands on him, checking for signs of life, and he clung to their presence like a drowning man to a piece of driftwood. Their determination resonated within him, inspiring a flicker of strength that he thought he had lost. In that moment, he realized that he was not just a survivor. He was part of a collective struggle, a web of humanity that transcended the isolation he had felt in those long hours of waiting. Yet, even as the rescue team worked feverishly to stabilize him, Beck was acutely aware of the fragility of the moment. The altitude, the cold, and the sheer exhaustion took their toll. He could feel his body slipping in and out of consciousness, and fear gripped him once more. Would they be able to get him down in time? Would he succumb to the very elements he had battled against? Each question spiraled through his mind. Yet somewhere within him, a quiet resolve began to take shape. He had made it this far, against all odds, and he refused to let go now. Finally, as the rescue team began to move him, Beck felt a rush of adrenaline. The cold air stung his face, but it was nothing compared to the warmth of hope that surged within him. He was being lifted from the brink, pulled from the jaws of death. As they transported him down the mountain, each jolt and bump sent waves of pain through his body, yet he welcomed the sensation. It was a reminder that he was alive, that he was still fighting. In the face of adversity, he had found a new determination, a renewed will to live that would carry him through the challenges that lay ahead. The physical impact post-experience, once Beck Weathers was safely back from the mountain, the physical impact of his ordeal began to reveal itself in stark and troubling ways. The toll of the high-altitude exposure was visible in his body, each bruise and cut telling a story of survival. He was filled with a sense of disbelief as he examined the frostbite that had begun to manifest on his fingers and toes. The fingers he once used to grip the ice axe, to write notes, to hold his children, were now mottled and painful. The doctors explained the severity of his condition, emphasizing the need for careful monitoring and treatment. It was a strange juxtaposition, having survived the mountain only to face a new battle for his physical well-being. Alongside the frostbite, Beck experienced other physical consequences of his time at high altitude. The exhaustion weighed heavily on him, a constant reminder of the energy he had expended just to stay alive. Simple tasks felt monumental. Climbing a flight of stairs left him breathless, and he often found himself staring blankly at the walls, struggling to comprehend how he'd endured such an ordeal. The disconnect between his mind and body was jarring. He, as the darkness of night enveloped the treacherous heights of Everest, Beck Weathers found himself in a chilling reality. Left for dead, he faced the unforgiving elements alone. Imagine battling temperatures that felt like they could freeze your very soul, while the thin air sucked away your strength. For 18 hours, every breath was a struggle, each moment a test of willpower. Beck's mind raced. Was hope really lost? As frostbite gnawed at his fingers and toes, he reminisced about his family, fighting to keep that glimmer of hope alive. He shuffled through memories of laughter, warmth, and the comfort of home, using them as fuel to push through the bleakness. Can you picture the sheer determination it takes to survive when the odds are stacked so high against you? Every time he closed his eyes, the cold seeped deeper, but he refused to surrender. Instead, he envisioned the rescuers who might come, imagining their footsteps crunching through the snow. What would he say to them? Would they even recognize him? Just when it seemed like despair would win, Beck's spirit ignited. His fight wasn't just against nature. It was a battle against his own limits. So, what would you do in his shoes? Would you have the courage to keep going? The mountain tests us all. How far would you be willing to push yourself to survive?